Hi, I'm Stephen Venuti, President of the Barrington Preservation Society. This year, the Barrington Preservation Society is proud to be working with folks from the Barrington Public School System, as well as folks from the Barrington Town Manager's Office, to put together a series of videos. These videos are going to focus on Barrington's rich history, as well as many other aspects of the town. We're starting out here today. We're going to be doing a video here. I'm standing at the entrance to the Princess Hill Cemetery, where Sidney Monstream Quass, a longtime member of the Barrington Preservation Society, is going to do a walkthrough of the cemetery and tell us all about some of the really interesting and fascinating aspects of people that have come to be buried here. So I hope you enjoy. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Sidney Monstream Quass, and I'm sorry that you're not here with me today to walk through this beautiful cemetery. I hope that when it's safe to do so, that you come back here with your families and do a walk in this beautiful space. And hopefully you have siblings, maybe who are older, who have done this same walk when they were in 3rd grade, and you can tell them what you've learned through today's video. I am the project director for this book for Barrington by the Bay, which hopefully you're reading in school. And we'll talk a little bit about some things in here as we go through this cemetery. But what I want to do is first go over a few ground rules. The first things that we talk about is please do not step on graves. You don't jump over graves. There are some that are really low to the ground, so you have to be careful of those. Please don't run through the graveyard, and please be respectful in the graveyard. So when you come back, make sure you keep those things in mind. And as Mr. Venuti said, we talked about what is the name of this cemetery, and he gave the name, but I don't know if you all heard it. So I have some options for you here to look at, and it is it Princess Hill Cemetery, like a princess, like Cinderella, Primrose Hill Cemetery, Princess Hill Cemetery, or Town Hall Cemetery? And the answer is number 3, Princess Hill, and it's named after Thomas Prince, who was one of the European founders of Barrington and one of the governors of Plymouth Plantation. And a few other questions. We're going to look for these names on some gravestones. These are names of some of the early European settlers, and what you may recognize is some of these names from around town. For example, there's Bicknell. Well, there's a Bicknell Park. We're going to look for Allen, and there's Allen's Cove. Vial, there's Vial Drive. Martin, in town there's Martin Avenue. Tiffany, there's Tiffany Circle and Tiffany Pond. In Townsend, there's Townsend Court. So think about where you live and some names you hear around town, and sometimes those may be names of people who were founders or the early European settlers in Barrington. And a couple more just quickly. One of them is, when was the first person buried here? We have 4 options: 1620, 1728, 1865, or 1918. So think about that. And the answer is 1728, and it was a young man named William Tiffany. He died when he was 18 years old, and the really neat thing is that we can actually still see his gravestone. Sometimes the old gravestones have fallen apart and broken, and you can't see them or find them, but that one is still here, and we'll find it. And a couple more questions. How many people do you think are buried here? 300, 3,000, 30,000, 300,000. So as you look around, you wonder how many people are buried here. The answer is it's about 3,000 who are buried here. They bury about 5 or 10 people here a year in addition. So this number is always changing a little bit, but that's pretty accurate. And the last question, as you will see as we walk around, is why are there flags on some of the graves and in some of the areas? And it does have to do with the military. Is it because someone died in a war? Did they serve our country in the military? Were they in the army? Or did they fight in a war? And the answer is they served our country in the military. So they don't have to have fought in a war. They could have served at any time. It could have been during a time of peace. They don't have to have died in the war, but as long as they served their country in the military, they should have a flag on their gravestone. So let's get started. we're going to walk over and look at the Peck tomb, which is right over this direction. So this is the Peck tomb. As you can see, it was built in 1909, erected and given to the town of Barrington by Edith Remington Phillips as a memorial to her father, Leander Remington Peck. Mr. Peck died prematurely, and he was a wealthy businessman in town. The Peck family also donated the what is now the town library, but it used to be the Peck School. So they bought that land and built that school for town. They built this tomb because back in the early 1900s, when someone died in the winter, they could not dig in the frozen ground to bury someone, so they had to store the bodies somewhere. So they would actually store bodies here when the weather was very, very cold until they could actually go and bury them. So let's see if I can get in. It's locked. Too bad. Well, the good news is I have been in here once, and what is stored in here now is lawn equipment. So the people who work on the maintenance of the cemetery store the lawnmowers and the weed whackers in this tomb now. And I have been in once when they were here and they were working on the lawn mowing, and I got to actually see the inside, but no such luck today. Now let's head up the hill to this Civil War monument. So here we are at the Civil War monument, and you can see this monument here erected by the town of Barrington in memory of her brave sons who served in the War of the Rebellion, 1861 to 1865. So you'll see that each of these stones here has a flag on it, and as we talked about earlier, that's because all of these people served in the military. Unfortunately, some of the flags are ripped and a little disheveled, but always on Memorial Day, the town replaces them. So these will have fresh flags in them sometime in May. There are 62 stones here with names and dates on them of people from Barrington who fought in the Civil War. They are not buried here. These are just stones commemorating those people. Of these 62, 8 of them did die during the Civil War, and but the rest died at other times, not during the war. So here is the Civil War monument, and as you can see on it, it says it was erected by the town of Barrington in memory of her brave sons who served in the War of the Rebellion, 1861 through 1865. As you can see here, there are stones around this area, and this signifies a family plot. So a family could buy an area to bury a bunch of family members, and they would all be in this one specific area. So here we have a gravestone for the Smith family. You will see also in the front are multiple stones which represent family members, and they just have their initials on them. One says H.A.S., that's for Hannah A. Smith. On the other side of the big Smith headstone, their names are on the back and the dates that they were born and that they died, but these are just small markings for those family members. In addition, you can see around the edge here this curved stone. There are actually 4 of them marking the corners. Again, this is another family plot, and this is just another way that a family plot is marked to show that this is where the Smith family is buried, within that, between these stones. Here you see 5 gravestones in honor of the Peck family, all buried together. This last one here is erected in memory of William Heath Peck, who died April 22nd, 1816, in the 18th year of his age. So So you want to look at the gravestones when you come here too, because you may find some of younger people, and particularly very young children who died very prematurely. All right, so when you're standing directly opposite the Blue Kangaroo Cafe, you look down and you come upon this gravestone. It's very hard to see, but you can read that it says John Williams. And John Williams was born in 1850 as a slave. Moved here, I don't know how or why he moved here, died in 1872. So he died a young man, age 22. But this is the only monument we know of in this entire cemetery that is commemorating someone who was a former slave by name with a gravestone. This area shows a lot of the monuments that are made of slate, and slate deteriorates over time, as you can see, and is broken. The slate will freeze and then thaw and they break apart. You'll see, for example, in this one, they have repaired it and put another piece of material behind it and adhered it to help protect it. And sometimes if you come through the graveyard, I don't see any now, you may see bright orange or bright yellow plastic around one, and that usually means it's broken and they're going to repair it. So people often wonder, why does it have that? But that just means someone will come and fix it and maybe adhere it to something like this so that it can be here for a much longer time. If you look across the street at the corner of the building, you see the FedEx box, and if you come straight east this direction, you will find a grave. This slate grave here is the grave of William Tiffany, who is the first person who was ever buried in Princess Hill Cemetery. And this gravestone is from 1728. He died when he was 18, and we don't have any information as to why he died so young. And if you look at the end, here is the footstone of the grave, and you'll wonder why people were so tall and why William was so tall. I don't think his grave really took up that much space, or his casket, but it seems like he's very tall. So here we have a gravestone for Jacob and Ethel DeSisto, and what's interesting about this one is if you lift this cover, you see a beautiful photograph of them on their wedding day. If you come find this by yourselves or with your family, take a look, but then make sure you close it. Here we have the slave monument. This monument is very significant as it was the first slave monument erected in the whole United States. So it was put here in 1903. There are other places in the United States, such as Mount Vernon, where they have a slave monument, but it was not put up till 1983, so many, many years later. And it is a memory for all the slaves and their families who served Barrington families. So this monument says, in memory of the slaves and their descendants who faithfully served Barrington families, erected in 1903. You'll also notice that there is a flag here, as slaves did fight in wars and served our country in the military, and so they very deservedly have a flag here. Many of them fought in the Civil War to try to gain their freedom. And a question I want you all to think about is, where do you think slaves were buried? Because as far as we know, there aren't slaves buried here. But if people owned slaves, they didn't often bury them in a graveyard with a headstone. And they may have buried them in their fields, on their property. So this is really commemorating the slaves and also showing a monument where people could gather to. So this gravestone shows Benson Bean, and Benson Bean is in the inside back cover right here, this tall man, and he owned a shop in Barrington. And so his gravestone is here. As you can see, he's also a veteran and served in our military. But There you go. Finish the book, and Benson Bean is right there.